I think what's really powerful, and always has been about television news, is two things. One, it can take you to places that you couldn't otherwise go and allow you to see things for yourself and hear for yourself from people who are immersed in the important and interesting stories of the day. So the ability to transport a viewer, or increasingly a user, to a different place, or introduce him or her to someone whom they would never get to meet on their own, is very powerful. The role of the journalist is to find those stories, find those interesting people, in some cases make the effort, in some cases the risky effort, to actually go to places where stories are unfolding, and then to really, in my view, be the user's or viewer's surrogate and guide to a different world. So it's very important for the journalist to provide context, to provide fairness, to also provide skeptical, not cynical, but skeptical questioning, to elicit contradictions, to point out problems, to certainly provide a factual basis for what you're hearing. You're not just a pipe down which people can give their opinions or propagate their agendas. But I think that increasingly the journalist is going to be seen more as a peer or representative of the user herself, not a larger-than-life movie star character. And if you look at the emerging personalities on cable news, I think you're starting to see that trend, a kind of authenticity and a peer-to-peer relationship rather than a pedestal-to-audience relationship. Well, the opportunity for news is to expand the formats that it uses so as to appeal to people who are now in complete control of the context in which they watch it. What I mean by that is you're no longer trapped having to get in front of the set at a certain time to sit down and watch a program that others have created for you. You can now, to use the jargon, disaggregate that program and disintermediate that news provider and choose what segments you want to see and assemble them in any way that you want and juxtapose them with other sources that you put together for yourself. So what used to be the role of the mainstream news organization, which was to cull information from all over the world and summarize it in neat form, continues, but it now exists alongside a different role, which is to become a provider of news content for consumers who themselves are going to aggregate information from all over the world and put it together their own way. So while a lot of attention has been paid, Andy, to user-generated content, what we like to talk about is user-generated context. That in fact the users are generating the context, especially the next generation of users who have no intention of being the slaves to somebody else's schedule or news agenda. I think you're going to have some kind of equilibrium that will eventually establish itself between traditional forms of news delivery, which includes traditional formats and traditional types of personalities, and non-traditional. Traditional news personalities, for the most part, have tended to be likable, if not bland, and some of them are bland, certainly acceptable to a large mainstream audience, or they wouldn't survive in a world where they had to appeal to large numbers of viewers to get ratings to keep their jobs. So the notion was to be not just credible, but also in some way inoffensive, with the most distinctive personalities either generating controversy or expressing themselves at the quirky end of the spectrum. What's changing now, in a world where there are multiple sources of content and multiple news providers, and certainly consumers who can pick and choose from hundreds, thousands of sources all over the world, what's changing is that there's also going to be a market for individuals who become news people much the way you have. There is no barrier, or virtually no barrier, to creating content or distributing content. Content creation and content distribution were the two great impediments that would stop people from becoming journalists, because it was very expensive and difficult, certainly with television, to gather video and sound, and even more expensive to distribute it. Well, now the equipment is inexpensive, and the distribution is also extremely inexpensive. Anybody who wants to can start uploading videos, and the most democratic and beautiful thing about it is, if people want to see them, then guess what? You'll make more. So I think what you're going to see, in addition to the carefully groomed, carefully created persona of the traditional news anchor or news correspondent, I think what you're going to see is some more authentic characters emerging, because the next generation is very sophisticated about media and much too savvy, for the most part, to accept the relatively superficial formulas that have come to dominate mainstream television news. So as I say, side by side, you'll have mainstream TV news pretty much sticking to its knitting, because there's still a large audience for that. And you're also going to have alternative forms of news that increasingly appeal to generations that are a generation that is very sophisticated about finding, picking, choosing, and adapting news that's of particular interest. It seems to me that Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert have made it much harder to be a traditional news anchor or a news commentator, the two characters that they are. Well, Stewart's not really a character. He is a comedy news anchor, and Colbert is a character. They've made it much more difficult for conventional TV formulas, because those programs, which, while they have broad audiences, tend to skew very young in their core appeal, are a good example of the way the next generation is going to see traditional news providers. I think that one reason they're popular is not just because they're funny, although of course that's the main reason, but because they get to the heart of the matter in a way that traditional news organizations have been afraid to do for fear of offending too many viewers.